clearing their throats, taking a sip of water, and starting their sermons about mothers, right? It's Mother's Day. So, happy Mother's Day to all of you who are mothers or who have had mothers. Now, I think that means all of us, but I can't know if all of you have had a mother. But even though I'm not a biologist, I do think I'm standing on a sure foundation. But I'm not going to preach on Mother's Day this morning. For one thing, I think Mother's Day is a hallmark holiday meant for you to spend money on flowers and chocolates. And I've always told my wife, you're not my mother, I ain't getting you anything. It's just for my mother, not for you. It's up to your children to get that. We went out with some friends on Friday night, and Julie they're from Kansas. She went to high school with this woman, and so she hadn't seen her for a long time, since probably their last high school reunion, so she wanted to bring her some sunflowers. So we stopped over at the H-E-B, our local H-E-B right behind us. I do get money by mentioning them, so the H-E-B is just real close. So I went in there, she went in there. I waited for her, illegally parked, making my confession. And she ran in there to buy some sunflowers. She came out with no flowers and said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "They cost like $90 or something." They jacked up the price, which point I said, capitalism, and we did not take flowers. So, I do know though, I keep looking at the calendar, and I know this. I'm not going to be with you all that much longer. So, I was sitting at my desk doing a gut check this week. And I've been given a marvelous opportunity here at Holy Comforter. You gave me a marvelous opportunity. One thing I didn't realize was, not only did you give me this marvelous opportunity, you gave me the opportunity to fall in love with the church. I wasn't sure I could do that. But I have. I've fallen in love with this place. It's given me an opportunity to preach this year. And I started this whole thing out in September. And if you remember, do you have your sermon notes with you? If you'll go back to September the, 16th or so, you might remember, if you see in your notes, that I promised to you that I would be honest and I would be authentic. In some ways, it's like I have been given an opportunity to preach in a way I've always tried to, but have never always succeeded. You see, I'll just make some confessions to you this morning. Sometimes along the way of the over 30 years, and I can't believe I can say that, I used to hear preachers say, "I've been preaching for 30 years, and I would whisper under their breath, "I can tell," right? But over 30 years, there have been times when I have avoided some topics. Because, my main goal, and I'm letting you peek under a curtain here this morning. Aren't you glad you showed up? Sometimes my main goal as a rector was to not stir the pot when things are calm. I made an honest decision to just be prayerful and authentic and preach in such a way that you can see the love and grace of Jesus Christ in my life. Ultimately, that's the gospel. And when I take off my collar, when our time here is done, I want to look back and I want to say, I gave it all to you. I don't have anything left. That's it, folks. That's it. The truth, definitely, you see, comforts the afflicted. I know this is an Episcopal church, but can you say amen? Doesn't it sometimes just comfort you in your affliction? I look out here today and I see some of you that can't always come to church because maybe of transportation issues. I see others of you who haven't been here for a while because of illness issues. I see others of you who are facing surgery, and there's nervousness about that. I know, we all have stories, do we not? I see other people who share with me our grief about losing a mother. I know that, and I know that's why Mother's Day can be painful, because sometimes all we're stuck in is having lost our mother recently or a long time ago, or some of us are stuck in the fact that, we keep talking, and preachers always do this, talk about this glorious mother that I never had, You might have struggled with it. So there's as much pain on Mother's Day as there is joy. I understand that. That's one of the reasons that I don't want to talk about that this morning, because we need to be comforted in our affliction. But you ready for some truth? I can cut the anxiety with a knife. What's he going to say? Sometimes the gospel afflicts us in our comfort. We're Americans. Yesterday I went to Round Top, Texas. I can tell you that God has a sense of humor, because in Round Top, Texas, I ran into Katie and Ed Ziegler. Guess where they were? They were buying pie at a little place that sold pies, Now you might ask, why was I there? I'm not admitting to that, but I will admit that I ran into them. And you know what my biggest problem was yesterday? My biggest issue? I was hot. And I don't antique. Who antiques? Anybody in here antiques? Raise your hand if you antique. What in the world is the matter with you? We got rid of that stuff once. We don't need it back, right? So I wasn't celebrating all the antiques I was looking at. What I was doing was trying to find a way to stay cool. And so Julie, with her friend who lives near Austin, we met her halfway. They went in. I go in a few times, but mostly I was thinking, what excuse can I use to go back to my car, turn it on, and turn on the air conditioner? I'm reminded that, I'm a Kansan and living in Texas, and y'all get hot down here and humid, right? And so I was struggling with that, and then it hit me. That's my biggest problem. My goodness, talk about privilege. I don't suffer like some people suffer around the world. Sometimes I go to the gospel with a great hope to be comforted in my affliction of being hot and humid, and I walk away from the gospel and from the Bible being afflicted in my comfort. I'm just like you. When we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, the fact that you were able to drive in a car here to this place this morning shows that you're in a top percentage of wealth in this world. And plus, I don't know about you, I only live a couple of, minutes from church. I got in the car this morning and I drove. And I got here, and Julie got in the car and drove it back home so she could make it to back here. And no one shot at us. No one was shooting at us and saying we couldn't worship, and we couldn't worship our God. That's unusual in our world. And we don't understand that sometimes. It does. Sometimes our comfort needs to be afflicted. Now, I know you're probably thinking, what's he going to afflict us with this morning? I don't want to afflict you. But I want to make sure you know that despite of a lot of what you hear out there, God's love had the first word in creation, and God's word of love will have the last. That comforts me in my affliction, but does that afflict me in my comfort? Well, I think it does. I think it does, because there's some things in my faith that I find very comfortable to live there and ignore the rest of the world. Ignore what's going on somewhere outside of Spring, Klein, Texas. When my biggest issue is showing up to Old Spring and finding the clothes stores are closed on Monday, that's not a real problem. There are real problems that this world faces. So, if all you have gotten from me over this past several months is that God's love had the first word and will have the last, I feel I've delivered what I promised. So that brings me to something I have always avoided as a preacher. I think. I've went through my memory banks. I do not believe I have ever preached on the book of Revelation. I have reasons, but suffice it to say, having grown up in a fundamentalist church, I was beaten up on many occasions with this strange book that's at the very end of the Bible. And so I've avoided it. No longer. Folks, this is my last go-round. I want to never be able to say I never preached on Revelation, because today, here it goes. I was reading someone who reminded me that no book in the Bible has provoked more controversy, more esoteric speculation, or sheer stupidity than Revelation. As you see, as late as the 4th century, there were two church fathers, Chrysostom and Eusebius, who hesitated to include Revelation in the canon. And the canon is just what we call the Bible. They struggle with that. Let's not put that in there. Martin Luther, those of you who came from the Lutheran Church, Luther described the book of Revelation as neither apostolic nor prophetic. He said this, "My spirit cannot accommodate itself to this book." All right, so you say, well, I came from the Presbyterians. All right, good. John Calvin, the founder of the Presbyterian Church, wrote commentaries on every book in the New Testament except Revelation. In Eastern Orthodox, I'm going to get everybody. In Eastern Orthodox churches, and we have two of them here, one nearby, one a little further away. Eastern Orthodox churches today, Revelation, the book of Revelation, is the only book that isn't read in their public liturgy. You see, a huge stumbling block stands in our way as we try to make sense of this book. That is highly symbolic and more often misread than understood. Now, personally, I would like to place the blame at the foot of the Left Behind series of books and movies. But its genesis stretches well before that. You see, anytime apocalyptic literature like the book of Revelation is read, it's almost impossible to understand. There's a whole lot of stuff about visions and symbols and numerology and beasts and goblins and sea monsters and dragons with 7 crowns and 10 horns. I think for most people, they avoid such because of the deep and mysterious symbolism. Now, what I find fascinating is that most people recognize the confusing symbolism and metaphors in Revelation and kind of accept it. But when you read the book and you come up against a lake of fire that burns all who would get close for all eternity, I guess, then suddenly they park the symbolism and they take it literally. I guess it's just too delicious not to see a few people burn, especially if it ain't me, right? See, that's what often happens here. What happens here is it divides the haves from the have-nots. And as long as I'm a have, I don't mind being able to stand up and against others or on the have-nots. One of my favorite authors, a woman by the name of Elaine Pagels, calls Revelation, the truth of Revelation, a piece of anti-Roman propaganda. She describes John of Patmos, the author of Revelation, as a Jewish prophet of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, all of whom wrote wartime literature. Writing as he did, John, he wrote soon after the persecutions under Nero in 64 AD, and after Rome ransacked Jerusalem in 70 AD. So it could be called wartime literature. Now, just briefly, John uses 2 images to describe Rome: a ferocious dragon that stood in front of a woman giving birth in order to devour the newborn son who would rule all the nations. And also, Rome was a prostitute drunk with the blood of the saints. But you see, the point is this. The entire book highlights the power of the empire. Rome, absolutely. But also all others that followed, showing violence, persecution, economic exploitation, and the like that was leveled against the church by Rome and all the Babylons that followed. Rome is seen as the city of power where the human drama unfolds among the kings of the earth. Now, I think there's a couple of things that people tend to do with Revelation. When they discover that, they say, oh, thank God, it's Rome. It's all the way in the past. Rome's no more. Or they look at Revelation and say, oh, this is all about the future. We'll just wait until it happens. We'll see what's going to happen then. But you know, I think it's easier and less demanding to put Revelation out there in the future somewhere. But here's what I want to tell you. Empire seems to be constant in the lives of human civilization. It's a constant rival to the kingdom of God as disclosed in Jesus. Rome faced God's judgment, but also every single empire that stands up and against God's kingdom ultimately faces the same fate. You know, I was reading another article author this week that suggested that some people complain that Revelation is too negative about the present earthly world and too focused on escaping to a future heavenly world. And as a priest who have walked with people for so long, over 30 years, I've sat down with people in my office and I've heard their stories. I know what they think. I know what they struggle with. And let me tell you, people who believe that Revelation is about a future where they can escape this earth, look at this earth as somehow bad. What did God say about this earth at the end of each day of creation? It is good. To consider this earth bad, to consider the world bad, is to be a Gnostic, not a Christian. To say it doesn't matter what happens to the world with the environment, what happens with climate change, is to be a Gnostic, not a Christian. We're called to be stewards of this creation, not to abuse it, to neglect it. But you know, it's easy to do it when you can go home and you can turn the channel. I don't know about you, there's one particular commercial I cannot watch. It's the one where someone's singing and they're talking about adopting dogs. And you see these sad dogs. I've already got 2. I want like 12, you know? And I just can't watch it. So you know what I do when that commercial comes on TV? I turn the channel. I do not want to see it. And sometimes that's what I do when I see the suffering that others face in this world. I turn the channel. I don't want to face it. I feel immobilized. I can't do anything about it. But I want to tell you, if you live in Darfur and you see your women raped, or if you live in China and you've been your family has been subjected to forced labor and sterilization, or if Russian jets bomb your elementary school and maternity hospitals, you make sense of Revelation because you understand the pain. Our problem is we're comfortable. We need to be afflicted. We need to know that we can do something about this. And I think what makes the book of Revelation so timely is that even though Rome fell a long time ago, empire continues to try and exert its influence. Much of the world suffers from corrupt dictators. Much of the world suffers from mass upheaval and emigration with an E. Many parts of the world suffer from starvation, from forced famines, ethnic wars, and environmental disaster. There are fewer people who enjoy peace and prosperity, and a whole lot of folks suffering from political repression, crushing debt, and heartbreaking poverty. For those people, the image of Revelation are not distant and misunderstood. They are breathtakingly familiar. But like I said, it's easy. I do it, folks. It's easy for me. It's easy for me to distance myself from those places by simply turning off the TV or shutting down my computer. But for people who live through such devastation, Revelation is a lived reality. These people reflect a longing for God to intervene in human history and to make right all the wrongs. How long, they pray, how long, O Lord, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? There is good news. The crimes perpetrated against humanity will one day be judged. It is in Revelation that we hear addressed to all the empires, woe, 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 great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Woe, 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 great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints, apostles, and prophets. God has judged her for the way she treated you. You see, it's difficult to live in the midst of such horrific abuse, destruction, and death. But there will come a day when a dramatic reversal happens. What do we do in the meantime? We lean into the suffering. We lean into it. We don't avoid it. I know we cannot stop the war in Ukraine. I know we can't stop the forced famines in Africa. They're a long ways away. But yet, we can do something. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And sometimes it starts with the smallest of gestures. How about the person who's having trouble with transportation come to church? Some of you say, I'll give you a ride. How about the person worried about the surgery? You call that person and say, I want to sit with you for a while just so you can express your concerns. How about doing something to those who grieve by simply allowing them to grieve in your presence? We can't do everything. We can't send the last dollar that will solve the famine around the world, but we can do something. We can realize that even bringing a box of cereal to help somebody's hunger who lives across the interstate makes a difference for one person. We can do something. To avoid the suffering is to not walk with Christ. To avoid the suffering. Jesus said in the gospel this morning, he said, the one we pick up is that I and the Father are one. But he says, follow me. You see, the problem is this, is that we want to be saved. We want to go to heaven. But sometimes we are so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good. God does not hate this earth. God made this earth, and we need to do something about it, to preserve it, but also to help those who are walking in it who are struggling. We are people of all people. We are the people who can offer hope, because we have hope that the entire cosmos, I'm talking about the entire cosmos, on planets not discovered, all through the universe, the entire cosmos will be redeemed. The biblical story that began in Genesis with a fall and in a garden ends in Revelation with the restoration of a city. The narrative progresses from ancient Eden to the New Jerusalem. And on the very last page of the Bible, Revelation describes this plot fulfillment as the healing of the nations. John envisions nations from around the world streaming to the holy city. And in this week's text, we read how divine mercy in the New Jerusalem heals all the human degradations of empire. Listen to these words. Never again will they hunger. Never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. My last meddling, I want to tell you from out here.